Is Donald Trump a racist? Okay, merely by my asking that question, I can almost hear hand palms striking foreheads, and I can visualize looks of stunned disbelief with people saying things like, "Sheesh, what's next? Are you going to ask if Wayne Gretzky played hockey or if Hank Aaron was a baseball player?" Thanks for tuning in. Before I really get rolling, again, thank you for checking out my latest video. I hope you find my content engaging and thought provoking, even if it makes you angry. I've said it many times on this channel. In order for us to discuss important issues, you have to be willing to risk offending people, and you have to risk being offended yourself. So if my channel does strike a nerve, and if you're not already subscribed, then I invite you to hit that subscription button down below. And if you want to be notified when new content is on my station, then you also need to hit the bell, and you click on all notifications, and then you're notified when new content comes on. So let's get back into it. Uh, how can I ask if Donald Trump is a racist? And the honest answer is because it's something I flipped back and forth with over many years, probably going back to his first run at the presidency back in 2016. Uh, and back then, my answer back 2016 and just before that, probably it would have been a resounding yes. Oh, yeah, he's a racist. And why did I think he was a racist back then? Well, my opinion was largely based on a media article about Trump's real estate holdings in New York City. I believe it was put out by the New York Times, but I'm not 100% sure of the source, but I do remember the article well. If it was the New York Times or whatever publication it was, they sent journalists who were qualified individuals to be tenants to properties owned by Trump's real estate company. Some of the applicants were white, others were black. And as I recall, they made sure that the black applicants who were submitting applications for tenancy in a Trump building, they made sure they had things like superior credit histories to the white individuals taking part. And what happened is that prospective renters, tenants who were black, were told, "Oh, sorry, there's nothing available." While the white applicants were told, "Oh, yeah, we've got, you can rent here." So that makes it a slam dunk, right? Well, over the ensuing years, I've had to mull this over a bit. I've mentioned here before that my family, we lived in New York City back in the 1960s. Yes, I am old. And then we lived in neighboring New Jersey in the early 1970s. And back then, the real estate market was, in my estimation, very racist. Uh, I was not old enough to remember a specific incident directly, but it's kind of in family history. My mother used to repeat the story many times. It was when we lived in Staten Island back in the 60s. Staten Island is one of New York City's five boroughs. If you've ever watched the old movie Working Girl from 1988, starred Melanie Griffith. She and her boyfriend, played by Alec Baldwin, they lived on Staten Island, which is where we lived. Anyway, while we were living there in the 1960s, late 60s, a dispute broke out between two neighbors, and it culminated in them being outside screaming and yelling at each other. Big confrontation. And one of the neighbors ended the argument by saying to the other, he said, "You keep this up and I'm going to sell my house too." And then he used the N word. "And sell my house to blacks," but he didn't say blacks. And the inference was apparently well understood by everyone. Everyone in the neighborhood knew what he meant, because the upshoot of it would be that if a black family moved into the neighborhood, that property values would fall. Even All in the Family, Norman Lear's famous TV I don't know if you call it a sitcom or comedy drama, whatever you want to call that show. They even dealt with this issue. But is it still this way in the United States? I mean, that was the late 1960s. It's 2025. Well, back in the early 2000s, I became friends with an American couple who'd moved to Canada. The wife of this couple, she was a senior executive with General Motors. Her husband, David, he was a lawyer and he couldn't practice law in Ontario. Obviously, he wasn't a member of the Law Society of Upper Canada, hadn't passed the bar here, but he did work as a consultant. And David and I, we got on like a ball of fire. He's a great guy. Uh, Sadly, they moved back down to the States. Sucks, but uh, one day, David and I, we went out golfing together. And I'd been over to his house and I remarked while we were playing golf, I told him how much I just loved his house. It was amazing. On the outside, it looked like just a simple bungalow from the front, but it went back forever. So it was so unassuming from the outside. But once you got inside, it just opened up into this huge, it's almost like the tent in Potter, Goblet of Fire. When he opens the tent and it looks like a little tiny tent. And that's what his house was like. And Dave then said to me something like, he said, "Thanks, I love it. But when we were looking at it, I asked the real estate guy if we could live in this neighborhood." And I was like, "What? Could live in this neighborhood?" And I don't know if I mentioned Dave and his wife, they were black. And Dave explained to me that he would say in Indy, because he always referred to Indianapolis, where he was from, as Indy. He said, "In Indy, I can buy any house I want, but I know in some neighborhoods that after my family moves in, we'll have a pickup truck full with five angry white guys in the flatbed." And then he said, "But y'all don't have that here in Canada." And I shook my head and I remember I said something like, maybe in South Oshawa. And look, I don't claim to be an expert on race relations in the United States, obviously, but I do think, my opinion, those issues persist to this day because racism does not disappear in a generation or two or three. It takes a very long time. I don't know that it can ever be completely eradicated. I do think things are better now than they were, but that doesn't mean there still isn't a long way to go. And now you might ask me, what does all this have to do with Trump being a racist or not being a racist? I hear you. Well, in my opinion, the New York City real estate market is racist. So inherently, anyone who plays in that sandbox, you could say that they are participating in a racist system or a racist structure. I think that was true back in the 1960s when, my family, when I was a little kid, we were there until I was 3. Uh, that was true back then. I think it was true when Dave and his family moved from the US to Canada back in the early 2000s when we became friends. And I think it's true today. I've been down to the States since then as well. Not that long ago. 2019, I was back in New Jersey. I think 2017, I was down Virginia Beach, Hampton Roads area, and I can still sense that racial tension. Well, if the New York City real estate market is racist, then what about the body politic of the entire United States? And of course, I'm going to say it again. This is merely my opinion, but to my mind, the answer is undeniable. Yeah, there is racism in the body politic of the United States of America. Racist attitudes persist to this day. And I don't think Canada is completely immune to racism either. I just don't think it's as pervasive here. So if I attempt to answer the question of whether or not Donald Trump is racist, I think the answer has to be a qualified yes. And I'm saying a qualified yes because in my opinion, Trump is merely a reflection of the body politic of the United States of America writ large. Let's go back. to Trump's first administration and the riots that broke out in Charlottesville, Virginia. Most will remember, if you don't, there was this large protest that took place over the removal of certain monuments attached to the American Civil War. And Trump famously, or if you prefer, infamously, made his famous quip about there being good people on both sides. But what's often forgotten is that Trump, without equivocation, he denounced white supremacists, groups like the Klan, and then he said, after having said, I'm not talking about the white supremacists, I'm not talking about the Klan here, but there were good people and bad people on both sides. Hmm. So that's a tough one. Could there have been good people? People not associated with supremacist groups, not wearing white capes or whatever, who and be opposed to the removal of Civil War monuments. Now, to be clear on one point, there were at that protest, at that rally, the Klan was there, white supremacist groups were there, and Trump did denounce those groups. But there were also people there who were not associated with those groups who were opposed to the removal of these monuments. Um, I think that, saying that there were people there not associated with the Klan, not associated with white supremacy, and that they were in favor of keeping the monuments in place. I think that is more than possible. I think it's probable. I think it's a slam dunk because we use monuments to venerate things or to serve as a reminder of things that were bad, like Auschwitz, the famous concentration camp, has become something of a monument to human cruelty. If the Germans had won the Second World War, maybe it would be a shrine to eugenics or something like that. This gets complicated. This is not an easy issue to discuss. And people don't want to discuss it because they're afraid of being branded. There is always that virtue signaling, and I'm going to say it, virtue signaling idiot who wants to take incredibly complex issues and they want to redact it down into the most simplistic form. And then they want to pick what they perceive to be the socially acceptable side. And I see it play out on in the comment field so often in some of my videos. People who take incredibly complex issues and then just reduce it down to something incredibly brain dead stupid that even a 4 or 5, 6-year-old can understand. And that's the world we live in, unfortunately. Now, what brought this to mind? What brought this to mind? Because honestly, I thought that Joe Biden was much more of a racist than Donald Trump, exponentially more of a racist than Donald Trump. Why? For his famous comment, if you're not voting for me, you ain't black, and his remark about black women stocking grocery shelves or something like that. Uh, and then back in the 1970s, when the busing issue came up, Joe Biden, as a U.S. senator, was opposed to having his daughter attend a integrated high school because he didn't want her going to a school that would become a jungle. And remarks like that. It's something lost on a lot of Canadians and even some Americans is that the Democratic Party used to rule the old Jim Crow South when Jim Crow for Canadians, if for my Canadian compatriots watching this, Jim Crow laws were laws that were instituted after the Civil War that basically made blacks second-class citizens, that codified segregation, uh, black bathrooms, white bathrooms, back of the bus, that kind of thing, codified it into law so that blacks would never be able to be fully participating members of society, members of the economy, etc. And well, that system was instituted at a time when the southern US was blue, blue, blue. American politics started shifting in and around the time of Reagan, and the blue South started to turn red, and the North, which had been Republican, started to go Democrat. Things flipped around. Things change in this world. But what brought this to mind, what got the wheels spinning here, was a news event that I only read about last night. What has happened is that we all know Trump, there's something of a, I don't know how to frame it exactly, let's call it a war on illegal immigration and refugees and people storming into the United States by the millions, maybe tens of millions. And that appears to have been a real problem during the Biden administration. Wide open border, caravans of people storming in, and a lot of them will claim refugee status as kind of a get out of jail free card in a way. I'm a refugee. I face persecution in the country I'm fleeing. And that legal maneuver, and if I'm going to call it a legal maneuver, that would allow a person to be granted residency status. They'd be allowed to then stay in the United States legally while their refugee status was being determined. You'd have to have a hearing. Does this person qualify as a refugee? And then that process can take years to play out. You get a hearing in 6 months, but then it's delayed another 6 months. And before you know it, 2 or 3 years have gone by. The individual is now working, they've gotten married, they've had kids, and finally, 3, 4 years down the road, they finally come up to it, an actual court hearing to determine the refugee status, and invariably the decision is made, well, on humanitarian grounds, we're going to grant you permanent residence because of all those aforementioned reasons. You got married, you had kids, you're working in the community, you've established ties. So on humanitarian grounds, even though, your refugee claim was bogus, we're going to allow you to stay anyway. Well, Trump has kind of pretty much shut that all down. You know, if you want to come into the United States, you have to enter legally, and you can, if you're, and they adjudicate it right there. If you, sorry, we're not accepting refugees, get out. But then a group of, I'm going to describe them as farmers from South Africa, individuals who are identified as Afrikaner, and these are the descendants of the original Dutch settlers of South Africa. The Afrikaner population in South Africa is reported to be under threat. There have been reportedly killings, people have been murdered, and it's not hard to understand why. South Africa's history, most will know it. Apartheid existed until I forget exactly what year, but I think we're into the 1990s. It was the apartheid system subjugated the black population of South Africa. They had to live in what they called homelands. An interesting thing for a Canadian to point out is that when South Africa was establishing their system of racial segregation and this apartheid system, they actually came to Canada and wanted to and conducted an investigation into our reservation system. So this homeland system was modeled at least partially on Canada's resident or reservations, where Indigenous or First Nations people reside. We have reservations; they called them homelands, and you know, you I don't know enough about South African politics or apartheid. I don't know the nitty-gritty. I just know the broad details. And sometime, I believe in the 90s, Nelson Mandela released from prison, and then the apartheid system was wiped out, done away with, and then they moved to, a one person, one vote system. Imagine that. And I don't know what the numbers are, but the population of South Africa is overwhelmingly black. The white population is an extreme minority. And I think it would be unreasonable to expect that this black population that had been subjugated for so long, there is animosity, there is anger. And this white Afrikaner population, these farmers, are quite often wealthy, very wealthy, and you're dealing with a country that has a lot of economic challenges, and so you have a recipe for racial strife and numbers. I talked about that in my last video. History is often a tale of numbers. And I don't know what the numbers are. I think you're looking at like 60, 70, 80 million black South Africans and 5 or 10 million white South Africans. So anyway, the point, long-winded, sorry it took me so long to get there, is that now Trump has made an exception to his, sorry, no more refugees, the country's full rule. And now it's, except for these white South Africans, we're going to fast track them and grant them refugee status. And they had them, Trump may have even been there. I haven't looked at the images. I've just read a couple articles on it, but apparently they're waving small American flags and being welcomed into the US. And the optics of this are horrible because, and I'm not disputing that these white South African Afrikaners that they may very well, I'm inclined to believe the stories that they are at severe risk. But in this dangerous world, look at Sudan, look at Yemen. There are lots of countries in this world, a lot of African countries, where people are their lives are in danger, but they're not allowed, they're not going to be fast tracked into the United States. Why is it only this group? A white group. The optics of it look incredibly, incredibly racist. And it's a complicated, difficult issue. And I don't know that there are any answers. Do I think Trump is a racist? I think uh, again, I'm going to get back to what I said earlier, the body politic of the United States of America, broadly speaking. I'm not talking about at the individual level. I'm talking about, and I'm not really talking about systemic either. I'm talking about things like attitudes. And broadly speaking, the body politic of the United States tilts towards racism. And Trump, as the head of the body politic, is a reflection of that. I actually, yeah, it's such a difficult issue. I consume a lot of content online on YouTube. Um, there's a channel by a guy who goes by something Wise, Damon Wise or something like that. It's a pseudonym. I think he's down in Baltimore. Black gentleman, wonderful station. I invite you to check him out. A righteous perspective, Trump supporter. There's another young kid who I can't remember his name, but he always wore a MAGA hat. Again, these are black individuals who are Trump supporters and vociferously so. Most of the people, I have a number of people on my station who participate in the lives who are familiar with Vincent Rhodes. I think he's down in Oklahoma. And he tilts toward being a Trump supporter. There's also What Do You Meme? I love that gentleman's content. It's amazing. Another Black American. And I find his views, I find myself very much in lockstep with him, probably 99.9% of the time, because he takes the nuanced view. He doesn't just knee jerk react, oh, Trump's a racist. He'll call Trump out on things that he doesn't like, but he'll also point out the things that he does like. And that kind of mirrors my own view. And there are other channels as well. I'm trying to think of them. These are just coming off the top of my head. Um, and the reason I find I gravitate toward Black American podcast style content is because I find Black Americans have a perspective that I very much appreciated, and that is a perspective that is skeptical of authority. And that is certainly me. I find that, you might find that ironic. I'm wearing an old regimental T-shirt from my time at Valcartier, but uh, when someone, it's the Reagan brought up the line, the nine scariest words in the English language. I'm from the government and I'm here to help. Trust me. Do we trust Donald Trump or Joe Biden or Mark Carney or Trudeau before him or Harper before him? And I find that Black Americans, because of their history, and history is generational. I was talking about my, what that little incident that happened 50, almost 60 years ago in Staten Island, New York. That entered, I don't remember it firsthand, but it entered into what I called family lore. And, we can talk about, memory being part of our DNA. I've heard that expression used. And so Black Americans, I find, because of their history, have learned a valuable lesson, and that is that authority figures do not always have your best interests at heart. I've spoken on this channel before about the infamous Tuskegee, I think I'm pronouncing it right, Koj Malik, who shows up on some of my live streams from down in Florida, corrected me on the pronunciation. I hope I'm getting it right. Tuskegee, an area or a city in Alabama where the US government medical officials went down and they wanted to study the effect of syphilis if left untreated. And they started this study all the way back in the 1930s, and it ran until the 1970s. 40-year-long study where they let men suffer in pain and misery, and ultimately, I think they all died, because they wanted to study how syphilis would progress in an individual who was given no treatment. And so, I'll end it off by, bringing up something from the COVID era. It's because of that Tuskegee study or whatever you want to call it. And you can check into this. It's on the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention in the United States. Their very own website chronicles this heinous bit of US history. And it's because a lot of Black Americans have distrust of government health officials. Remember Tuskegee, that Hank Aaron, when the COVID medical interventions started rolling out, he, and to his credit, wanted to demonstrate to Black Americans that, oh, you can trust the government. And I say to his credit because it's not his fault for trusting. Yeah, it's not his fault. When trust is abrogated, you don't blame the person who trusted, you blame those that abrogated that trust. But at any rate, he went, got jabbed, and of course, many will know that within a couple weeks after he died suddenly. Nothing to, according to all the experts, just to keep myself safe for the U2, big brothers out there. According to all the information available, it had his sudden death was strictly because of old age. He was in fine health beforehand, and we all get old and die. Had nothing to do with the you know whats. Believe what you will. At any rate, thank you again for watching. I probably could have I've gone on for half an hour, and I could probably go on another half an hour. It'll be interesting to see if this spurs any discussion. I think race relations are something that need to be discussed in the public square, as I like to call it. And unfortunately, I find that you get these Antifa radical left wing types who want to squelch free speech. They want to squelch debate. They want to be the paragons of virtue and mount their throne and say, this is what you're allowed to think, this is what you're allowed to say, and this is why I have my channel. because I do not think that is a healthy situation in a vibrant and a liberal democratic society. Big L, not big L loser, big L liberal democratic society. And when I use that word liberal, I'm referring to classical liberalism, not neo fascist liberalism that hides and calls itself liberal, but it really isn't. It's more fascist in nature. It's an interesting way that the political spectrum, a lot of people think it's a line. I've heard many describe it, and I agree, as a circle. And the far left and the far right, they join at dictatorial alley. And you get authoritarian dictatorial style when you get to the extreme ends, they join. Anyway, that's enough for now. As always, like if you like, share if you want, subscribe if you enjoy my content. I love criticism. I love engaging. If you want to call me an idiot or whatever, I've don't worry. Uh, Thick skin, I can handle it. Big shoulders, well, they're not that big, but they're all right. Uh, Go nuts. And we'll see what I have to talk about in the days to come. I will be doing a live stream on Wednesday, today. By the time this uploads, it'll be Wednesday. So tonight, Wednesday, the 14th of May, in and around 9:30, might be 9:45, might be 10, somewhere around there. I will be doing a live stream talking about a passage from the Gospel according to John. And I'm going to be looking at the story. I believe it's at the end of chapter 7 and into chapter 8. And it's the story of the woman caught in adultery. And I want to unpack that because I think it has relevance even in today's crazy world. How could a woman caught in adultery in first century Roman occupied Judea, what could that have to do with today's world? Well, I did a video recently talking about Islam and asking the question of whether or not Canada is at risk of becoming an Islamic country. Well, how would Islam deal with the woman caught in adultery? How would Judaism? How should Christians? What did Jesus teach us about how we are to deal with that woman caught in sin, in adultery? And I hope it's engaging, and I hope I get quite a few people jumping on because I love seeing the comment field filled up during the live chat so I can interact. It's and I learn a lot. Anyway, I've gone on far too long. God bless. Thank you for watching. And again, like, share, subscribe, all the things that YouTubers say. Station is growing. I'm adding subscribers pretty much every day for the past month or so. So maybe I'm doing something right. Who knows? Thanks, and we'll talk to you soon. Good night.